Story 1. Every time we hit turbulence, I start mentally drafting my will and texting, laughing out loud, like I am not sweating bullets. Story 2. Terrified. Completely terrified. I have been on airplanes before, and it never becomes easier to fly. I am overwhelmed with fear and anxiety at the mere thought. I would much rather drive. This is counterintuitive. I understand that flying is safer, but it does not change my desire to stay on the ground. Story 3. As a child, I was not very afraid at all, but as the years progressed, I became more and more frightened each time. It also does not help that I am not a frequent flyer, which makes it very difficult to get used to it. Story 4. Not very. I saw an analogy where someone was holding gelatin with a small paper ball in the middle of it and said the air was like gelatin and the ball was the airplane. They shook the gelatin and the ball shook too, but afterward it was still in the same place. That was turbulence. Story 5. I do not get nervous flying for one simple reason. The person in charge of flying the airplane probably wants to arrive safely. They have had a lot of training, and there are very few other vehicles in the sky. Even those that are present are also being flown by someone who wants to arrive safely. By contrast, when I drive on public roads, they are full of people with less training than an airline pilot, and they do not care if I make it home safely, as long as they get where they are going as quickly as possible. Story 6. Once I am up in the air, I tend to think, well, if you fall from 30,000 feet, chances are pretty high you do not survive, so panicking will not do much, will it? Story 7. It's not the plane flying or crashing that makes me nervous. What makes me nervous is being stuck inside a seat sitting straight up, crammed together and rubbing legs with a total stranger. So close I can smell the sausage on their breath. No fresh air. No way to cool my body down if it's too hot. Access to only a small amount of water. Needing to actively converse with strangers to allow me to use the restroom. Being very uncomfortable for a long period of time. I want to sleep, but the child in front of me is screeching like a banshee, energized from the 3 Coca-Colas given to him by his parents in the last 2 hours. Reaching out for me and grabbing my hoodie while I am crouched over in my seat trying to close my eyes. Story 8. The older I have gotten, the worse it has become. I used to be fine, but now any bump causes me to clench and silently panic. Flying back to England from Florida after a hurricane a few years ago was the worst 8 hours of my life as I flew through the tail end of the storm. Story 9. I used to love flying when I was young, but now I would much rather not. I am terrified of plane crashes, even though I know the chances are extremely low. I am very aware of any noise or movement, anything that might be out of the ordinary. What I try to do is sleep as much as I can, especially in the last few years, since I have had to travel for work multiple times a year. I try not to let my fear stop me from traveling, but it has kept me from choosing destinations more than 3 or 4 hours flying time away. I do not think I could handle longer flights. For some reason, I feel much safer flying around Europe than anywhere else. Story 10. I have no problem with flying. What triggers anxiety for me is the crowded airports and the security checks. Once I make it through these, I tend to relax and nearly always enjoy the actual flight. Story 11. I love the feeling of taking off. I have never had an issue with it. The seats, on the other hand, and how crowded you are very annoying. Story 12. I worry up to a year in advance about a trip, but I am autistic, so everything feels like doom and gloom. Often when I am on the trip, I am okay. Turbulence sets me off even though I know it is normal. I hate landing and takeoff. Story 13. With all of the recent crashes and mishaps involving commercial airplanes reported in the news over the past few years, I have become more nervous. Story 14. Incredibly nervous, very much so during takeoff and then mildly but noticeably throughout the whole flight until the last hour or so when I know we are heading back to the ground. It does not matter to me at all how jumpy and rough the landing is because at least we are going to get back to solid ground one way or another. Story 15. I am ready to die as long as my insurance is claimed by my parents since suicide does not count. Story 16. Story 17. I still become a little anxious before leaving for the airport, but once I am there, all my nerves settle down. Story 18. Hated the thought of it ever since I watched the first Final Destination film when I was a kid. I am determined to overcome the fear soon. Otherwise, I will regret not traveling later in life. Story 19. 5 out of 10. When I was a kid, I bent down while the airplane was descending, and it gave me a terrible migraine from the air pressure. I lost all my hearing in my left ear for 4 days while the migraine persisted. I tried to tell my parents, but people do not always listen to children. I was crying, but everyone else just saw me as an annoying screaming kid on the plane. Since then, I have been extremely scared of bending down to access my underseat hand luggage during a flight. I keep my back flat against the chair for the entire flight. Story 20. Terrified. Statistics indicate the safety of air travel compared to many other activities, but that does not change how frightening a plane crash can be. Story 21. My first airplane ride was at 3 years old, and I have flown 20 times since then. I would say I have been on enough flights to not be very nervous. Story 22. I rarely fly on a plane. The last time I flew was in 2017. I get nervous and motion sick when it takes off. Story 23. I'm irrationally afraid of heights, so it's pretty terrifying for me to fly. There is no logic to it. I often think of the old joke, I'm not afraid of flying. I'm afraid of crashing. I couldn't disagree more. I don't think we are going to crash. I'm just absolutely terrified of being that high up. Story 24. Not at all. I love learning about how airplanes work and everything involved. Learning about incidents, accidents, and disasters that happened, including the causes and how they have been prevented from happening again. All this knowledge allows me to maintain awareness and understanding of the time, effort, resources, and engineering that go into airplanes and those piloting them to minimize risks and ensure safety. However, the Federal Aviation Administration should not be trusted due to several instances where they failed to maintain safety standards, resulting in the deaths of hundreds and total destruction of aircraft. The National Transportation Safety Board, however, is absolutely trustworthy to the maximum. The National Transportation Safety Board should have greater authority and control over transportation industries in general. Story 25. On a scale from 0 to 100, about a 3. Honestly, some of the most peaceful, stress-free, relaxing moments of my life are in airplanes. I quite enjoy flying and never really worry about it. I also really enjoy airports. Story 26. I would say a 3 out of 10 on the nervous scale. Most of it revolves around takeoffs. It just feels like you are not going fast enough to take off, and then when you do, those first few minutes feel like you are going to crash. Once the plane levels out, I am perfectly fine. I honestly get more nervous on amusement park rides. Story 27. A little. I have to fly every 3 months, and I prepare my mind so I am ready if anything happens. But if it does happen, I want it to be quick and over. Last week, I texted my children just in case. Story 28. Not at all. I am not the one controlling the aircraft, so I can relax. The key is to trust the professionals to do their jobs. They are infinitely better trained than the person who passed you on the road to the airport. Story 29. The first time I traveled by plane, I was very relaxed. The older I get, the less relaxed I become, and I am starting to wonder if next time I fly, I will need something to help me sleep. Story 30. Flying itself only gets me a 2 out of 10. What am I going to do in a crash? I have accepted my fate. I just hope I do not get the middle seat. Then everybody suffers. Story 31. 0%, but I also have a peaceful acceptance of death. If the flight were to go down, what am I going to do about it? I do not want to die stressed. I might as well enjoy the drop and hope it is quick and painless. Story 32. I wouldn't say too nervous, just nervous enough because I have never been on a plane and never will. If I cannot get there by car, I am not going. So just a little bit. Story 33. The last time I flew was in 2019 to visit family in Germany. I thought it was exciting to board a plane again. I am actually more nervous about driving than going on a plane. Story 34. I used to be a great flyer, then had one trip home from Germany that was 10 straight hours of severe turbulence, and now I need to be sedated. Story 35. Scared of takeoff and landing, but cruising is fine unless we hit turbulence. In that case, I am sweating, and there may need to be a change of pants. Story 36. I developed claustrophobia after coronavirus disease. This is coming from a person who has flown on planes since he was a baby until adulthood. Plane rides make me a bit nervous now, and I need to be medicated before I fly. It helps if we get an exit row seat to simulate a feeling of more space. Story 37. At this moment, I am more nervous than on normal days because I just saw the news about the airplane crash in India this morning. My sincere condolences. Story 38. Transportation Security Administration security checkpoints make me more nervous than flying, even when I know I am not carrying anything illegal. Story 39. Not too much. I don't know if it is still true, but Murdoch says turbulence has never brought down a plane in the A-team, and the statistics say it is still safer than driving. Story 40. Not at all. If we crash, we crash. Cannot do much about it. I love flying with my friend though. He is really scared of flying, and it is fun to mess with him. Story 41. I get severe anxiety to the point where I want to pass out. I would rather drive. I understand that flying is safer than driving, but my anxiety does not allow me to fly. Story 42. Not really nervous at all. I just hope whoever I am going to sit next to for the next couple of hours is decent enough. Story 43. You know those people who fall asleep as soon as they sit down on the plane? That is me. I am a plane sleeper. Story 44. Not so much flying, but the preparation. Did I remember everything? Is some angry airport security agent going to spend the time yelling? Story 45. Not at all. I have been on many flights with no issues. I have even flown into thunderstorms with no problems. The part one I'm concerned about is what problem they are going to encounter at O'Hare Airport this time. Feels like every time I go through there I get a delay. It is ridiculous at this point. Story 46. Not at all. I am not very keen on turbulence, but that is not an issue in a large jet. Remember, the most dangerous part of flying is the journey to the airport. Today's events are absolutely dreadful. However, compared to traffic accidents, they are thankfully rare. Story 47. As a child, my family flew frequently. I always loved it until September 11th, 2001, when I became terrified of terrorists. Now I really love flying. Everything about it. Crazy rough landings are fun. Turbulence is an adrenaline rush. Seeing the world below me out of the window is awesome. Story 48. I have my private pilot's license and fly my own plane regularly. Some flights can be challenging, such as instrument meteorological conditions, but I am never nervous. Commercial flights are not an issue. I have more difficulties driving on the freeway to the airport. In fact, the closest I have been to something really bad happening was being in a car hit from behind at night in the rain and hydroplaning across 3 oncoming freeway lanes. That was scary. Story 49. I'd rather drive or hop on a ship. The man my middle name comes from was the only survivor in a plane crash that included his family and most of his friends. Even though he survived, he was severely injured. Not all died on impact, but he was too injured to help anyone. He dragged himself out of the wreckage and propped himself up against a tree before the plane caught on fire. So he sat there watching those who were still alive burn to death. I got chills when he told me the story for the first time, and I am leaving out many details on purpose. I do not like flying. Story 50. As an aircraft mechanic, I know things will break and there is probably something already broken on the plane. American looking at you. I usually fall asleep right after wheels up. Story 51. I was nervous a few months ago, but upon learning about the statistic regarding being more likely to die in a car crash, I feel much better now. Most of us drive every day and arrive at our destinations safely. Story 52. The flight is okay, but customs is always a difficult moment. There are many things and rules to remember. Story 53. Not at all. There have been a couple of times when turbulence was really bad, but even after the initial adrenaline spike, I calmed down pretty quickly. There is not much you can do other than trust your pilot to get you through. I guess in a way I feel safer since I typically fly Delta Airlines to places I visit frequently, so I have faith that it has better pilots and equipment. That trust could be misplaced, but I keep telling myself what I want to hear. I have had more close calls driving a car, riding a motorcycle, and snowboarding. I am actually very paranoid about falling off a chairlift. Story 54. I get nervous just watching airplane scenes in movies. I hate that I am so afraid because it has limited my travel and life experiences. Story 55. I have medication from my doctor. I close the window and imagine that I am on the ground, like in a movie theater. I also play music through my headphones. Story 56. I have a private pilot's license. At the beginning of my training, I was a bit nervous. Landings scared me the most. But the more I got to know my plane, the weather, and myself, the less scared I became and the more confident I grew. Turbulence no longer scares me at all. Story 57. It does not. Flying is the safest way to travel, mainly because I do not have to worry about other people flying planes in the same airspace. Story 58. I am not a nervous flyer at all. I love it, turbulence and all. If I die, I die. There is nothing I can do to stop fate from happening. I could sit in my house for the rest of my life, and then my ceiling might unexpectedly cave in. I do not have trust issues. Story 59. I have flown often enough, even across the Atlantic, to visit family in England. However, I have mild obsessive-compulsive disorder, depression, and anxiety. A few years ago, my brain said to me, "Guess what you are afraid of now?" Whenever I have to fly, I get a prescription for lorazepam to take before each flight, and it makes the trip much easier. If anyone has issues with flying, I suggest talking with a doctor before your next trip. Even if they do not prescribe medication, they can likely help identify and treat the source. Story 60. Not scared of flying, but very uncomfortable being in an airplane. I am tall and I get claustrophobic. Story 61. Not nervous, but I really hate it. I flew multiple times a week for about 8 years at the start of my career. It's a nightmare to deal with delays that always seem to happen, and the stress and lack of control only pile up. So what do? Take some time off and go on vacation, only to have to get back on a plane anyway. I told my wife I wouldn't fly for vacations anymore. She never had to travel for work, so she was upset about it. Then COVID-19 happened, and corporations cut their travel budgets. Now, I only fly about once a month or even once a quarter. I also make a lot more money, so I strictly fly first class to avoid as much stress as possible. We get to travel for vacations quite frequently now. Story 62. I look forward to experiencing some rough turbulence. It is interesting to feel the vibe in the plane when that happens, as I am really enjoying the ride. Story 63. None. I fly all the time, mainly for fun on airliners. I also have a YouTube channel devoted to all of my flights. I do not really think of anything going wrong. To be honest, flying makes me feel relaxed. If something happens, I guess it was my time. I cannot really sit and worry about it before every flight. Story 64. I wrote step-by-step instructions for my younger siblings on what to do if my plane crashes and I die. The instructions include who to call, where my will is, details about my life insurance, information on my bank accounts, and where to find the investments I made for them. Hopefully, they will never need to read it. Story 65. I get very anxious on planes, but it is not because I am worried about crashes or any issues with the plane or flying itself. I become anxious about being completely trapped in a small space with many strangers for a long time. You cannot leave, and you do not know if someone will act strangely. If I flew alone on a plane, I would be calm. Story 66. The last couple of flights I was on, I was blackout drunk. I would rather go by boat than fly, especially now that I am sober. Story 67. I have never been nervous. I was on an airplane every month since I was 6, so it is just like taking a bus to me. Story 68. Used to be to the point I was overwhelmed and had to sit with the flight attendants. I would cry, panic, and have to take a full 10 milligrams of diazepam to calm down. Now, I only feel slightly uneasy due to repeated exposure. I found the person I love who lives in a different country. They are also a musician, so we have to fly all over the world. A good partner can work wonders. Story 69. I can't do it. I passed up my 5th all-expenses-paid international work trip this year. It is starting to affect me professionally, as they are getting offended that I am passing up free trips and taking it personally. Still, no. It is not only being afraid of heights. It is more about feeling sealed into a tube you cannot get out of. I do not do elevators either for the same reason. Story 70. None nervous. It used to make me nervous, but then I flew many times for work. It does not bother me now. If we die, we die. What is the alternative? Not go wherever we are going. Story 71. Well, as much as I would love to, I have never flown anything but a glider, and there was a licensed glider pilot right behind me every time to take over if necessary. I have been a passenger in many planes, jets, and helicopters. Aside from a few really bad weather incidents and once having a goose go through an engine on takeoff, we had to circle around, land, and then wait all day in a hot hangar for a replacement to arrive and get installed. This happened in a Royal Canadian Air Force Hercules in Summerside, Prince Edward Island, when I was a teen. I have not really been stressed other than maybe being hungry or annoyed by cargo too close. Grouchy is a whole different matter. Except for the few times I have flown business or club class, it has almost always been a miserable, too hot, too dry, too loud, and too crowded ordeal with lousy, if any, food. Story 72. When I am up in the airplane, I actually enjoy looking out the window. I try to keep busy by talking, watching the screen, or playing a game. If you think about it, if anything goes wrong with the airplane, you are probably going to die, which is very depressing. So, it depends on your state of mind and what you are thinking about. Therefore, my answer is both yes and no. Story 73. I have had panic attacks while on them before. It is easily my least favorite place to have a panic attack, so now I heavily sedate myself, which has actually made flying a pleasant experience most times. Story 74. Not at all. Although accidents involving aircraft are being reported more now, they are extremely rare. I was on a 12-hour flight a few months ago. I was too busy being uncomfortable with how cramped the seating was and with no lumbar support to think about nervousness. But I am glad other people do. Every time we hit turbulence, I made hand gestures to my friend next to me about the plane crashing, and his panic helped the time go by faster. Story 75. Even after the latest crash and the number of crashes this year, I will still be on a plane later this year with no worries. Story 76. After all, if we are crashing, it is going to be fatal, quick, and painless. I would pick that over any other travel accident, whether by road, railway, or sea. I do not even have a will drafted before I fly because I genuinely do not worry about flying. Statistically, it is the safest means of transportation, and if it happens, it happens. Story 77. The Potomac plane crash killed 2 people I know and triggered agoraphobia on top of trauma. My wife is French and lives in France. Very. Story 78. I am not a nervous flyer. I have found that taking a gummy makes the uncomfortable coach seat feel like first class. Story 79. No point in getting nervous about something you have no control over. Went skydiving. Did not even get much of a reaction from that. Story 80. Depends on how long it has been since my last flight. Generally, I fly a few times a year now, so it is okay. But I did not take a flight for about 2 years once. When I got on the plane, I was terrified, just like the first time I flew as a child. Story 81. Not at all. I adore takeoff and I have the tiniest smidge of apprehension about landings, but it is so small it would not even show up under a microscope. That is about it. Story 82. I got so nervous I drank an entire bottle of vodka thinking it would relax me. I do not drink and I ended up feeling drunk and anxious. Story 83. Not at all. I am often fast asleep before takeoff. If it is a short flight, I wake up when we touch down. Story 84. 0 to 2% on takeoff is where I imagine it immediately crashing. Coincidentally, there was such a crash today. For a short time, it went up to maybe 8%. Once landing, it popped a tire and the landing gear caught fire. I had to go down the slide. It was awesome. However, I was a little more nervous after that for a while. I fly often. Story 85. It never used to bother me. Now I prefer not to fly at all. I get anxious the day before, and the feeling lasts until I land. Story 86. Not that much. I gauge the pilot's experience through their voice. If I hear a woman, I panic. If I hear a young man who is stumbling in speech or making a lot of pauses, I panic. One time, I was sitting next to a college student. Our plane had to make an emergency landing somewhere due to low visibility, and he kept bugging me by saying things like, "I hope the plane crashes. I don't want to go to college." Story 87. I didn't fly until I was in my early 20s, so I never got exposed to it. It's manageable but still unpleasant. It's not helped by the airport being so stressful. I read Soar, which really helped alleviate fears about the plane noises and the wings bending. Prior to that, I assumed every noise meant a crucial component was breaking. It also demonstrated how lift works and that a plane falling out of the sky is incredibly unlikely. The other thing that helped was reminding myself that the hosts do this multiple times a day and that the pilots, excluding Malaysian Airlines, don't want to crash the plane. Story 88. 0%. Flown roughly 900 times since starting this job. I am asleep before wheels up and wake up at wheels down. Story 89. On an Airbus model, I'm good. I would be more scared of being on a Boeing right now, especially for a long-haul flight. Story 90. Especially when there is no manual way to at least glide the aircraft down. I have only flown once and do not know much about planes. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.